Hey, Buy Then Build, it's Walker Dybel. Today we've got with us an old friend, Keith Jacob from Focal Point Coaching. Keith, how are you?
I'm well, Walker. Thanks for having me on.
I, I'm so excited to talk with you, and I think I think the members of the acquisition lab are going to be able to extract a ton of information because the thing about you, Keith, is that you both fit in as kind of a member, but then you also like stand out, right? Like, so in other words, you've bought two or three companies as well as started companies along the way, but now you work as a business coach oriented towards growth to help people grow their business to their ultimate exit. And so I can't wait to dig into this.
Well,
Um,
great.
yeah. So Keith, let's start with the end in mind. Can you kind of just give us a feel or an overview of what you're doing at Focal Point and sort of the high level of how you help people?
Absolutely. So I'm taking a 25-year business ownership career and now working one-on-one with business owners and business leaders and teaching them, coming up alongside them, getting over some hurdles with them when it comes to growth, strategy, time management, people management, and money management.
And before we jumped on the call, you said, when you work with us, we, double revenue.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you guys
Yes.
say that kind of tagline or your
Yeah,
mission?
absolutely. So we double production, double your personal production, double your free time, which is huge,
Yeah.
right? We all know that. And we double your income. And we don't do it with contracts. We do it on a month-to-month basis. So if I'm not hitting the goals that you have set, you need to find somebody else to help you.
That's amazing. And so uh, let's go all the way back, right?
Okay.
Let's go all the way back. What I want to know is you started um, St. Louis Staffing. Can you tell us, kind of the origin story and what your company provided and kind of get us from that day to this day?
Yeah, you bet. So the origin story really starts with my youth, right? Because I came from a family of entrepreneurs and grew up around it. So it wasn't scary to me. And quite frankly, I knew all through high school and college that one day I'd own a business. I just didn't know what business, right? And I worked for a couple years for two different organizations after I graduated. But then the opportunity to get into the staffing industry was presented to me in 1995. At that time, someone had introduced me to more or less a couple of angels who said, "Hey, we've been helping companies or helping people start staffing companies, and we've got this need in this area of St. Louis that we really need to have filled. You're a young guy, you hustle, you know how to sell, and so forth. Let's put something together." And so we did. And these guys helped me get started. And I bought them out a short time afterwards and so forth. But we founded St. Louis Staffing in 1996. I
Yeah,
was
I mean that's an
see,
incredible story already. So there's a couple of say senior executives or people that have been around the block who had a proven model, almost
yep,
like a franchise, and they sort of handpicked you as a CEO and built a company around you, and then you bought them out. How long?
that's exactly right.
I'm just curious. How long between when you started and when they bought you out?
It was around 4 years.
Great. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Keep going. Keep going.
No, no, that's and that they had been in the staffing industry before and wanted to see their enterprise grow without doing the day-to-day management.
Got it.
Now,
Got it.
all they did was give me back office infrastructure and some coaching, right? And then it was up to me to really make the business grow and make it happen, and that's what we did. Um, so I grew the organization both through organic growth and different market penetration. So by the time we were done, we were basically servicing the eastern half of the state of Missouri, plus some areas in southern and central Illinois. And we did it through territory expansion, organic growth, but then I also purchased two other staffing companies along the way. One
But
in 2000. Yep.
sorry, before we get to the acquisitions, which I love, I want to back up just a little bit. Um, what did St. Louis Staffing do? Was it
Right.
temporary workers? Was it office workers? Like what actually was the product? And I want to kind of touch on just in terms of doing the day to day during that early time, like
Oh
where
yeah.
were your biggest challenges and what
Yeah.
were maybe a lesson or two from that time period?
Yeah, you bet. So we were a very glamorous organization, very glamorous, right? We employed a lot of entry level blue collar and entry level white collar factory workers,
Yes.
administrative workers, and
Mhm.
so forth. But it was super high in demand, and the growth rate for that segment of the staffing industry was like a rocket taking off.
Yeah.
Um, Early challenges, really, there's some of the same early challenges these days. It is trying to balance the demand that your clients have for people with enough available people to get placed. So it's the whole supply and demand thing. Over 25 years, we would see through some recessions and some boom times, those swing different ways. So the challenge then became, wow, we don't have any job orders because it's 2008 and it feels like the world has gone to hell in a handbasket, right?
Mhm.
But we got all these people. And then, swing it back around to even just a couple years ago, unemployment is at unbelievable lows. There's no people available. And yet you've got customers screaming at you for it, right? So it's that constant balance between the two. That was certainly a challenge.
Thank you. I just want to get some context around what your business was. So along the way you decided to grow through acquisition rather
Yes.
than just organically. So I'd like to unpack that decision there.
Yep.
What
You bet.
happened in your life that you said to yourself, let's what was it opportunistic? Did you strategically decide to grow through acquisition, or how did that kind of come about?
Both strategy and opportunity, but it's one of those things, I'm sure you can relate to this too. You create your own opportunity, right? By being open to various things that come along and planting seeds with your network as you go. And that's exactly what I did. 2000 and the recession of 2008, 2009 was devastating for my business. And except for a couple of strong clients, we probably would not have survived. We went from 15 million a year to 6 in what felt like overnight, and so forth. And so
I
coming
actually
out of
can I just pipe in, Keith?
yeah,
I actually think I was one of your clients during that time. I think my printing company was one of your clients, and we literally went from like 14 to like 1. Like, I
yeah,
mean, it's just like boom, right? Yeah, it was
yeah.
intense.
Well, that very well can be because you were right in our right in our service territory. So but I came out of that recession knowing that one day there'd be another one, right? And I didn't know when, didn't know how, didn't know how it would impact me, but let's diversify. Let's get into another vertical. And so I had been a part of a couple different industry groups planting seeds along the way that, hey, we want to do something different. And all of a sudden I got a call in I think it was late 2010 from a consultant in the staffing industry that I had used, and he said, "I know about a IT staffing company in Kansas City, and
Mm,
the owner needs to sell,
mm,
and she needs to sell right now, and so forth." So, yeah,
perfect.
exactly. So we had the resources. I had the talent on my side to be able to act quickly, and her situation, without getting in too deep, was that the IRS was closing in on her for unpaid taxes. And
Yeah.
she was facing, at 60 some years old, she was facing personal bankruptcy and so forth. So the deal I structured, I felt was fair. She was able to walk away from her company, the IRS, and any other taxing authority with zero debt. She had debt to her bank. And what we did then was to pay her an earn out over a 3-year period of time, and the majority of that money went to her bank to satisfy her note. We got the bank on board to say, okay, we'll take this deal. We're not going to get 100%. We understand that, but we're going to get something, and we would get nothing if you were not going to come in here and help this, because
Mhm.
the IRS would have taken all our assets first.
Was it a, I mean, was it a 100% earnout?
Yes.
Interesting.
Uh, the only We did put down money. I want to say that we obviously had to pay the IRS and taxing authorities, but
Okay.
and that was the money down that we put, right?
Got it. Okay.
And then the earnout portion of it over 3 years was, I think it was 80% went to the bank, 20% went to her.
And not to pry, but
No,
if I'm
please.
going too far, let me know. But like, if she was facing personal bankruptcy from the IRS, does that mean that your sort of like initial cash infusion was equivalent to like her net worth?
Well,
Because
well,
that could be a big number.
yeah, I would say that her net worth at this point was truly negative,
Yeah, right. Of course.
right?
Of course. Yeah.
And so forth. So,
Can I ask about
um,
the size of the deal? Like, what was it doing in revenue?
um,
This would have been
she
around like 2013, I'm guessing. Is that about right?
2011.
Okay. Okay.
And we were probably basing this on 2009 and half of 2010 numbers. But she was probably $1 million company, million
Mhm.
dollar in revenue company,
Yep. Okay, great.
and what we ended up getting
Mhm.
were basically contracts with her current customers.
Yep.
That's what we bought, right?
Mhm.
And so forth. And one was a very, very good contract that was with the interestingly enough, with the Department of the Navy, working on sending contractors in to work on their HR websites.
Now, the amount that you were paying her was, I think you said 20% and 80% to the bank, right? Were you
Correct?
able to make earnings over and above that, or did you just
Yes.
see all of that as cash infusion? Okay, so you were making money as you went.
Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't have done the deal on a
Right.
break even. Yeah.
Right. 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 Okay. Just curious. Um, and what did you learn with the transition?
I learned that the vertical of IT staffing has its own pitfalls, just like the vertical of commercial staffing that we were very much experts in, right? And so forth. And it's not easy, just like this isn't easy, but it's very rewarding, just like this is very rewarding. You're just dealing with you know, um, different types of business within the same industry. I also learned that it's very difficult to manage a much smaller entity on the other side of the state from where you are. 250 miles away might as well have been California, right? Sometimes that was
Yeah.
tough. Um, Also learned that her clients were naturally skeptical of an owner who had no experience in the IT staffing side of the world. And so
Hmm.
I really had to come in and play the role of account manager, sales guy, um, you know, let me earn your trust before you really feel good about this whole deal. Because quite frankly, they could have taken their business elsewhere.
So let me ask you. Let's unpack both of those, okay? Because they're kind of important. First, on the distance from St. Louis to Kansas City, the second company I acquired was 3.5 hours away from my house
Yeah.
in Springfield, right? Which
Right.
there's no
Right.
major airport. At least in Kansas City, there's like an airport, right?
Yes,
So
that's
this was
true.
like
Yeah.
this was like a 3.5 hour drive, and I usually would drive there and back in one day, right? So just it's
Yeah.
a whole work day just in driving, and with no plans of moving there, right?
Right.
In retrospect, it was probably one of the biggest miscalculations I made in my own like acquisition history. And so um, I thought, listen, middle managers at large organizations run multiple facilities all over the place. Like this is
Mhm.
totally doable as a job description. But I feel like there's kind of a gap between like large organizations and small acquisitions. Can you maybe speak to
Yes.
that a little bit, and like what were the challenges and how did you sort of like solve for them?
Yeah, so some of the biggest were that if we, as a IT staffing company, you not only have a set of customers that are asking you to send them people and the
Yeah.
ones who are paying your bills, but
Yep.
all those contractors that we had working on site for our customers, they're also internal customers, right? And you got to keep, it's a great balancing act, but you got to keep everybody happy.
Hmm.
Now, the customer that you're sending the invoice to every week, they could put up with you saying, hey, look, I'm only going to be in Kansas City every 10 days, every 2 weeks or whatever. And I'm going to make sure that we have a agenda and that we have a very focused call while we're there and touch on all your points. By the way, my phone is always available. The contractors are, that's a completely different story. And as internal customers, you're their boss, you're the owner. Um, they have very different needs making $50 an hour than the person making $10 to $15 an hour.
Copy.
They want you when they want you and immediately.
Hmm.
And as a 10 to $15 million company, we did not have a robust HR department, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty
Right.
much me, and so forth. So that was a challenge. It was much different, not only buying customers who pay your bills, but buying a set of internal customers that
Okay.
I had not anticipated before.
So culture, a very big difference in culture.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, like, in B school, you sort of learn like 50% of acquisitions, sort of fail to extract the value that they think they're going to, right?
Yeah.
And we know this going in. And the thing is like, we also know that it's like always culture. A misalignment in culture is the number one reason for that, right?
Yep.
Um, and I feel like when you buy one company, it's like, okay, but then when you're running one and you buy another one, the cultures are so different, right? And it's like, this in theory, but until you do it, you don't really like, all of a sudden you understand like, oh, okay, now I understand completely why this happens. My
Oh,
question
do
is,
I?
did
Oh,
you,
do I have a story for you?
let's hear it. I want to hear it. But
Well, no, it actually has progressed down the timeline some. I will get to it though.
okay. So did you end up, I'm just curious, did you end up putting like a general manager in Kansas City? Like you had someone else on the ground, like sort of managing ops?
Um, Not immediately, and that was to my detriment,
Exactly.
right?
Okay.
Yeah,
Got it. Got it.
exactly. We should have, because the owner that I purchased from, she lived in Kansas City.
Yeah.
She was available all the time, and she had a very she was a what I would call a high S on the disc scale, so very nurturing.
Yeah. Slow.
Everybody, she took care of everybody.
Yeah. Um, Thank you. Okay, so you do this acquisition. You start this business. You pay out your partners, your mentors. You grow organically.
Yep.
You hit the Great Recession. You come out acquiring this company in another city.
Hmm.
What happens next?
Um, we stayed in that IT space in Kansas City for a while.
Hmm.
It forced us to get into the IT space in St. Louis for a while, also.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, we moved away from it. Ultimately, we decided that we need to focus on the core of our business. And yes, we want to protect ourselves if there's another recession and look at a different vertical, but these two verticals were too different. And
Got
so
two
we
different.
kind of we let the contracts expire. We stopped marketing ourselves as an IT staffing firm and so forth. And it's not that we didn't try and help customers who continued to come back to us. We
Sure.
didn't make it a focus. We got back to, we stuck with our knitting, right? Dance with the one who got you there, whatever you want to call it. But we got back to our core business.
I love this. Key, this is really interesting because when I you can look at, like, I've got a growth through acquisition funnel. It sort of takes you through these steps. But what I love about this nuance here is that you went into this going, look, our core competency is staffing, right? And
Yeah.
we want to continue growing. We'd love to be in other places in the state. Let me go ahead and acquire this other company, thinking that your core competency was translating into an adjacent market, meaning
Mhm.
IT, when in fact the nuances made it so differently, you ended up shutting it down.
Yeah, that's right.
That's actually incredible. Like, can you Was it the things we've already talked about? I mean, was it culture? Was it, $50 an hour people are different than $10 an hour people? I mean, were these sort of like the things, or was there something else like, my my industrial, factory temporary workers were always employed, but IT workers would sort of like work for like 8 hours once a month. I mean, like, was there other patterns that just ultimately
Yeah.
made you say like, I don't like the metrics?
One of the biggest things that we faced was in both the Kansas City, St. Louis markets. We even tried some in Columbia along the way because it made sense up and
Yeah,
down Highway 70, right? Might as well.
yeah,
Is that for client acquisition, if you were not on a vendor approved list, it took you an incredible amount of time and effort to become approved,
got it.
right?
Yeah,
And
got it.
so forth. So what you were dealing, instead of the great big rich contracts that folks
Yeah.
like BJC and Magellan and Edward Jones and Monsanto at the time would hand out, you were relegated to 1 and 2 contractor locations, and it's
Mhm.
really hard to grow a business that way.
It
Um,
makes perfect sense. I mean, it always like, you always think it makes sense, like, oh, let's go get these big accounts and spend all year getting one. But at the end of
right.
the day, like, you need elephants and rabbits, but more
Yeah,
importantly, even just getting the elephants, like, they don't really drive a good ROI typically anyway.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
I
Yeah.
mean, like,
Yeah.
even if it's just you and you're not paying an employee to like work that account, it's the opportunity cost on your time, right?
So here's what I did do as
Yeah.
far as hiring somebody to help with this whole thing. Shortly after the acquisition, I went out and hired a very high profile manager, gave him a VP title to
Yep.
come in and run that new segment of the business.
Yep.
And he convinced me along the way to say, why don't you let all of operations bubble up to me, right? And
Okay.
so forth. I'm like, well, you got the pedigree, right? You are a hard charging high D on the disc scale,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
And so forth. Make it happen. Let's put the incentive comp together to really make it happen, right?
Mhm.
He ended up costing me, I know, at least 3 of my awesome commercial staffing clients. I lost 3 internal people as well, and could not get us to grow. He could not get he couldn't get us on the vendor list, the big IT rich
Yeah.
vendor lists and so forth. So after a year and a half, we had to part ways.
I,
Another huge
I,
learning lesson for me, Walt.
yeah. Well, and the thing is like, I'm sorry to keep jumping in with my own realizations. It's
No,
supposed to be an
do it.
interview with you, but the thing
Yeah,
is, like, like, when you go out to do an acquisition, right? It's kind of like, I always talk with people about, like, you've got to figure out what the right opportunity profile is for the business that you're attacking, and it starts with
right,
understanding yourself and what you bring to the table.
right.
And in my experience, doing very similar thing as you have, when you hire an operations person and sort of hand over sales growth to them, for me, it's not once worked out. And they can kind of sell me on it really easily, right?
Yeah,
I'm like, I know
yeah,
you're awesome. I know you can deliver, but like the skill sets are just so different. Like, I call it revenue revenue generator or profit maximizer, right?
yeah.
Almost a
That's great.
play off of, visionary and implementer. You know what I mean?
Mhm,
But
mhm.
sort of, uh, I use it on a horizontal axis anyway. So thanks for saying that.
Yeah,
I've had that same experience. Um, before we go any further, Keith, I mean, let's stop asking, the softball questions. What's
yeah.
your disc profile?
I am a high D, high I. In
Okay.
my natural style, I'm a super high D, and
Hmm.
then in my adapted style, my I comes up because I like to keep the friends that I make and keep the customers that I've acquired and so forth. So,
And D is dominance, right?
right.
It's that, I demand respect. I'm directing, I'm driving. I is influence, isn't it?
Influencer, that's correct.
Influence. S is slow and steady, and then the
Slow and
C
steady.
is, it's the analytical one. It might be
Super
control.
detail oriented,
Yeah,
introverted, analytical.
that's it. That's it.
Much like you.
Yes, yes, yes. Clearly. So thanks for that. So okay. So did you sort of let the Kansas City company roll down before you made this other acquisition?
Yeah, so by the time 2015 rolled around,
Yeah.
we were out of IT staffing.
Okay, great.
Um, yeah,
So what
that it
happened?
was
Yeah.
yeah, we let the contracts expire. We in both Kansas City and St. Louis, and we had stopped. And by 2015, made the decision to stop marketing ourselves that way,
Mm-hmm.
and then got back into our core business. And again, I kept planting seeds. I'm not done. I don't know. This was not a failed acquisition. This was not a
Right.
failed
That's right.
attempt.
No, that's
I
right.
made money on
No,
this deal,
yes.
right? I
Yes.
made money on this deal, and more than anything, I learned a ton. So that when the next opportunity came along, it went much better.
Can we actually? Okay, but hold on. But I want to get into that. But actually, it's occurring to me that today you are a business coach for growth. Okay.
Correct?
And what, like there was clearly lessons that you learned in that episode with the Kansas City episode that you are applying and helping other people use today. What are
Yeah,
some of those? I mean, I'm not gonna say like what were your big takeaways as much as I want to say like based on what you know now, like how do you integrate if you were coaching yourself back in 2011,
yeah, yeah.
what would you have done?
Right.
That's what I'm.
Well, yeah. Starting with the deal that was presented to me,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
The consultant who presented it to me was not only consulting me as buyer, but consulting her as seller.
Yes.
And my attorney said, I'm not comfortable with this. We're going to have to take extra steps to make sure that he understands he can't do both because he's not going to do both well, right? So I would counsel anyone who looks at an acquisition to say, you, you got to be represented. And that can't be the representation that's because I've run into that. I've run into a broker since then who wants to do both. And I'm like, nope, not going to happen. Right. That's number one. That's what I would have coached myself on. Now my attorney he knew enough. But the other thing I would say is, what is your plan? What is your plan to put boots on the ground immediately in that marketplace where you're going to go? And by the way, as an owner, how much time do you anticipate yourself spending there? Because you've got this nice mature business over here in St. Louis that can self-run. Are you prepared to spend a significant amount of time in Kansas City? And if you're not, you probably ought to walk away from this one. Or it's got to be somebody you trust so much that you've worked with quite a bit, and so pull somebody out of your operation and leadership if they would agree to go to Kansas City with some very clearly defined goals.
Okay, so implementation.
Yeah,
Um, can we back up to your comment about the consultant? Because it sounds to me like the consultant was simply trying to basically broker the deal, right?
absolutely.
And in lower middle market and Main Street deals, it's extremely uncommon for there to be two brokers,
Right.
right? Are you suggesting that you would insist on two brokers?
No,
Yeah, one
I am
broker, but two attorneys.
absolutely two
Okay,
attorneys, and there were
okay,
two
yeah,
attorneys involved. What I'm saying is, don't fall into the trap of because this is somebody you have used as a consultant before and you trust him and so forth, that he is able to have both your best interests at heart and the seller's best interests at heart, right?
understood. Yes,
Right.
yes.
For this deal, cut off your relationship with him essentially,
Mm-hmm.
or cut off your old relationship with him. Just say, hey man, you are going to represent the seller in this.
Mm-hmm.
And no hard feelings, but
Of course.
we got to stay at arm's length.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that.
Hmm.
Okay, so you decide to do another acquisition, and
Yes,
you believe that you are smarter, better, faster now because you already did a lap around the track. Is that
absolutely I am. Yeah,
right? Okay, so what
yeah,
happens? How
yeah.
does
So so I hadn't stopped sowing seeds, and in fact, I had started reaching out to brokers who represented only staffing companies, and
Okay.
just setting, and just having a relationship with them, and looking at deals that they would send across, and really taking my time to understand those deals, letting them educate me some on those deals and so forth, and then kind of fact checking it with other folks in the St. Louis marketplace that I know did M&A
Mm-hmm.
but not necessarily staffing, and saying, basically, I'll buy you lunch, help me understand, right, a little bit more, so I can make a super educated decision, and so forth. And so eventually, it's a funny story because a broker who's up in Pittsburgh, he had been sending me deals and so forth. And he's like, look, I don't even know that this one is even worth talking to you about because I do not have any idea where Alton, Illinois is. All I know is that the state of Illinois borders the state of St. Louis, and I think St. Louis is on the eastern side near Illinois. Is that correct? I said, yes, that is absolutely correct. And Alton, Illinois, yes, we should definitely talk about this
Exactly.
one, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because it's everything that Kansas, in a lot of ways, it's a lot of what Kansas City was not. Alton, Illinois is essentially a suburb of St. Louis. And so, it's a 25-minute drive from my office and so forth. So it was an easy one. And this was an easy deal. I had a retiring staffing company owner who had taken the business over from his dad in 1986. And by
Mm-hmm.
2017, he didn't want to be in staffing anymore. He had a little farm north of where he was, and he wanted to travel with his wife and live on his farm. And he didn't need or want a ton of money for this deal. He just wanted a bit of an annuity. So
Okay.
we structured the deal much differently. He was not in trouble with the IRS.
Yeah.
Um, through all of my due diligence, and I did all of the due diligence using uh, basically checklists that I had assembled myself from talking with different M&A folks
Mm-hmm.
within the staffing industry and outside. I had the same attorney for this deal, um, and so forth. And what he did not want a lot of money down. In fact, he asked for money down. I remember him asking for $50,000 down. And again, similar size business, about $1 million, but the margins were very different. $1 million company on a IT staffing, may net you 10% with gross margins in the 40% range.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
$1 million on a very similar to my business, again, stuck to my core.
Mm-hmm.
$1 million may net you 3%, right, with gross margin in the 20% range.
Mm-hmm.
So when I looked at his books in due diligence, his tax returns and so forth, it was not hard to
Right.
decipher,
You
right?
understood it. Yeah.
Understood it well. So I did my own due diligence. We worked through everything. He had asked for like 50,000 down. I countered with 25. The 25 actually went to pay his broker, and that broker only represented him. My
Mm-hmm.
attorney represented me.
Mm-hmm.
And then all he wanted was a 5-year earnout. And so I gave it to him. And we're still in the middle of that. Now, the company that ended up acquiring me honored that earnout and so forth. He wanted a monthly annuity payment, essentially, is what he wanted. And so we arrived at that number by basically taking a salesperson's commission and doubling it. So I don't have, and we have a list of clients that were his, and we stick to that list every month. Now I've grown the business around that office and so forth to include clients that weren't his, but he wanted those clients, double salesperson's commission on it for 5 years. And that's what we did. It's very easy, very cut and dried and so forth.
Brother, where are you finding these deals? In other words, like, is this common? This is how staffing businesses transact?
Well, I will say this for your audience.
Yeah.
Here's the dynamic of the staffing industry right now. I'm 53
Oh my
and young
God. You only
and
look
young.
52. Yeah, I thought you were
Dude. Well,
52.
my birthday was just a few weeks ago, so that's what's throwing you off. So, so I'm 53, and now I'm a former owner. But as an owner, I was young. I'm still
Yeah.
young for that
Yeah.
industry right now.
Yeah.
There's
Uh-huh.
a lot of 65 plus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing about a staffing company is that there are virtually no assets.
Mm-hmm.
The only assets in the organization is your book of business, your accounts receivable, and what office equipment you have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have a succession plan as an owner in a staffing company, you could just let it die and so forth. But you could turn it into value if you don't have necessarily the staff to come in and take and sell it to. You could find an outside buyer for that company and walk away um, getting some value for your organization. And staffing companies have value; they cash flow.
And did you say 3% net?
3% net, that's correct. On the commercial side of the business, Walker,
Okay,
and that's one segment of staffing. That's probably less than 25% of the entire staffing world is on the commercial side of the business.
I understand. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks for that. Um, okay, so this guy wanted an annuity.
Yep.
Curiously, how did you instill confidence in him that you would pay it?
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean, that's going to be the hard part of this deal. However, he already had in his brain that that's what he wanted somehow.
right,
So,
right. I would say this entire deal took 90 days, and he and I spent quite a bit of time together, got to know each other and so forth, and we built some good trust.
yep,
Um, I think we knew some of the same people also, so he did his homework
yeah,
and checked on me as far as my character went and so forth, and that was good. And um, I did all those things that I said I was going to do,
mm-hmm,
leading all the way up to the sale and then post sale and so forth. But he only had one employee, and she is still our employee, still running that office for us and so forth.
right,
His big concern was take care of my customers and take care of Laura.
right,
And
got it.
and we have. Now, I actually, as part of his earnout, I pushed him a little bit to um, to consider taking a bit of a lower percentage on the current business and a bit of a higher percentage on business we would generate out of that office,
Oh,
right?
interesting.
And I told him I'm going to be totally transparent with you, and I have been ever since. But he took only 2% of the business we generated, while he took a big fat number, 16% on the list that was there.
Yeah,
He would have earned more money so far under my plan because of what we've been able to grow out of the business. He's
perfect.
a conservative guy, right? And he knew what his business would produce, and that's really what he wanted to base it on.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't have taken that deal either because I don't know. Well, the seller doesn't know what the buyer's going to do after.
No,
Yeah.
no, they
So
don't. They
yeah.
don't.
Okay, this is really fantastic and eye opening. Thanks, Keith. But oh, first of all, before we move on, I want to say you sort of hit the trifecta, right? Number one, from my perspective, number one, you had a similar, larger, maybe even longer lasting business in the exact same industry, in a bigger market already. Okay.
Yes.
Number two, um, you figured out, or he figured out, what he wanted out of the transaction and met those needs. And number three, and perhaps the most importantly, I'm curious, do you know John Bly? He was the president of EO, like Intergalactic, at some point.
Oh,
But
I'm sorry, I don't know.
yeah, he ran he sold it, but he basically grew a CPA firm through acquisitions. And
Ah,
I mean, forgive me, I don't know how many it was, but I get the sense he did like 100. You know what I mean? And
oh
he did
wow.
a lot.
Yeah,
Well, he did a lot of them. And the thing is the very first thing that he does, because he's got inbound deal flow from other CPA firms, is all he does is he gets on a plane and he flies out and he sits down and meets them for lunch. I don't want to see any numbers. I don't want to see anything, because if we don't get along, you
yeah,
know, like it's just not
yeah,
going to work. Like it's all about culture, right? And so it sounds like
yeah.
you guys had got along, and then you invested time in him. And so it sounds to me like you had sort of this trifecta here.
We invested a ton of time before
Yeah.
he and I mean, I knew some numbers from the broker, but before he and I ever started exchanging numbers, we probably had had 4 to 5 meetings at that point.
Right. Okay, got it. Plus you had attorneys and everyone had fail safes and all the rest of it, I'm sure. So,
Yeah,
okay. So, like Keith, why on earth would you consider selling your business? Like this is what happened next, right?
that's it.
So here you
Yeah,
are
this is it.
buying, and all of a sudden you're going to sell the whole thing. I mean, what?
Yep.
Like, tell me, walk us through it. What happened?
Yeah. So the organization that that purchased me had approached me in late 2018. They were an IT and engineering staffing firm and wanted to expand their verticals by acquiring a local commercial staffing company, right?
Perfect.
And I happen to know the two owners just through, being in the same industry in St. Louis, different events, things like that. And I wasn't ready to sell in 2018.
Yeah.
We were fresh off this acquisition, and
Yeah.
actually 18 was a pretty good year. Um, 19 was not as good a year for us, and a lot of that had to do with the tightening of the employment situation. It was
Mhm.
super tight, and we
Mhm.
couldn't get as many orders filled and so forth. I was I was past 20 years and coming up on 25, Walker,
Mhm.
um, and I felt like I had done what I had set out to do with this company,
Yep.
and now it was time to do something else.
Yep.
Um, I didn't know exactly what it was. And so they came back to me, the company that bought me came back to me in late 19 and said, "We're still interested." I said, "Okay, let's talk about it." We got a deal done in 60 days.
Yeah.
I got approached November 1st and sold the company. We closed on the deal. No, that would be 90 days, excuse me. Closed on the deal January 27th of
Excellent.
this year. Yeah.
Excellent. Nice
And it
job.
was time. It just felt like it was time. I
Yeah.
wanted I wanted all the headaches of this organization as a business owner to be somebody else's headaches. And I was going to look for my next opportunity.
I think that a lot of first time buyers specifically kind of overweight the question, why do they want to sell?
Hmm.
And I think that more often than not, it's usually what you just said. It's
Yeah.
like, I've been doing this for 25 years and I've done what I'm going to do. I've started a business before. I kind of want to do it again. Right.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and once you put into context, you know, like something like 50% of the financial reward of being a business owner comes in the one day that you close, right? Or the result of actually selling, right? Plus
Yeah.
like what entrepreneur doesn't want the stripe of like selling your business, right? I'm not saying
Yeah.
that
Absolutely.
why are they selling is unimportant. I just think that you just sort of embodied what I think most sellers actually look like. And so I just wanted to kind of point that out for its worth.
Yeah. And especially if you're a first time buyer,
Mm,
and the deal seems too good to be true, sometimes it really is, right? And if there's
yeah,
some nefarious reason in there as to why somebody's selling, you'll find it if you do the right due diligence,
that's exactly
right?
right.
And then
That's
walk
exactly right.
away. But for the most part, I think it's true. I think especially with the aging population, there's a lot of people who don't want the hassle anymore.
Yeah, yeah. It's it's funny. I was talking with a buyer, and he showed me his deal, and I looked at it. He's not in the acquisition lab. It's actually like someone else, but he was showing me this deal, and I was looking at it, and I was like, I was thinking to myself, like, all right, when I'm coaching buyers, I don't give them an opinion. It's like
Yeah.
I'll ask you questions, but I'm not going to tell you to buy a business or not.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at this, and I'm just going like, there's really nothing about this that I like, and like that was kind of my take on it. And I kept asking him, like, what do you think? And he just, at the end of the day, his conclusion was, it just looks too good to be true. I'm not going to do it. And I was just like, okay, like, if,
There
if,
we
you-
go.
if you fill the dishwasher this way and I fill it that way and that all the dishes get clean, it doesn't matter. Like whatever you
Right.
think. So it was great to hear you say that. So,
Right.
um, okay. So you sell your business.
Hmm.
Obviously you went out in the woods and grew a beard for a while, right?
No, I actually have had this for quite a while.
And you didn't know what you wanted to do. And how
No.
did you kind of find your way? And moreover, I also want to highlight that when you did decide to go out and become a coach, you did something um, very relevant. to the audience here, and that's that you actually bought into a franchise.
I
Right?
did. Yeah.
I'd love to know. I'd love to know. Going from exiting your company to where you are now. Like, tell us that story.
Well, first of all, you should know that I have a 5-year employment agreement with the company that employed me, and it's very one-sided. I can leave whenever I want. I've
Okay.
chosen not to leave yet because it's been less than a year and we're still really in transition. And one of the biggest reasons why we're still really in transition is culture, right?
Okay.
I established
Yeah.
a 24-year culture,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
Their culture is not anything like my
Mhm.
culture.
Mhm.
And my team, I'm sorry to say, right now is struggling. And so I
Okay.
don't want to walk away and leave my team high and dry. But
Yes.
I do have to look out for me, right, and the future and so forth. So I'm going to exact the kind of change that I can in this organization and so forth. But I cannot stress enough to any buyer who will listen that this culture thing is so critically important.
It really is.
It is number one,
Yeah.
absolutely number one. And if you don't spend as much time in due diligence really peeling back the layers to understand the culture as you do the numbers,
Mm.
your deal may be just as much doomed to fail.
Mm.
I'm not saying that the acquisition of my company is doomed to fail. I would never leave it in
Mhm.
that situation. I still have some earnout, right? That I want to make sure is secure and all those kinds of things. But
Mhm.
more importantly, I want to make sure my team is secure, and I want to make sure that I leave them in a good place too.
Mhm.
So knowing that this was not a career move for me to continue to work for this organization that I don't feel is a great cultural fit. So I started looking, and I had lots of people giving me lots of advice because again, I'm planting the seeds, right? And so forth. And so I had established a relationship with a friend who is a franchise broker,
Yep.
and he had talked to me about some different stuff. But I'm not owning a Subway, I'm not owning a commercial cleaning company, and so forth. I wanted to get away from overhead.
Mhm.
For me, in this time of my life, I wanted to get away from overhead. And
Mhm.
one day I opened up a promotional video from him where he did an interview with another focal point coach, and that clicked. It resonated with me on a very deep level. And one of the biggest reasons why is that I've been coaching for 25 years.
Mhm.
I've been coaching my clients. I still coach my clients to this day in the staffing space about how to put together a great plan to bring in the best people and keep them there, right?
Mhm.
It's not just launching people at a customer and hoping they stick. You don't build relationship. You don't build, shoot, I have some 15-year staffing companies, relationship with companies that have been using us for staffing for 15 plus years. And you
Mhm.
don't do that by just sending them warm bodies,
Mhm.
right? You
Mhm.
do that by coming up alongside of them, becoming a partner, and coaching them on those things. Now, there's some consulting in that also, where I am telling them some things that I think they should do. But a lot of it is coaching. A lot of it is just exactly what you described. You don't tell prospective buyers whether to buy or not. You ask them the right questions to get them to the point of wanting to make that decision. And in this video, that's what I heard. And it resonated with me. You mean I can start an organization where I can do this thing that really like feeds my soul and do it every day? And somebody's going to pay me for it and I can earn a living doing this? Yeah, I want to know more. That was August 1st. On October 31st, I made the commitment to buy the franchise and started my training and so forth. I did my due diligence. Um, and I talked with an EOS practitioner here in St. Louis, one of the most successful ones. I talked with Vistage chairs here in St. Louis about whether I wanted to do that or not. I talked with consultants who weren't affiliated with anyone and just had hung out a shingle and built their business. And what I did more importantly than anything was I talked with 15 different focal point coaches across North America and Canada.
Wow.
And I spent an hour with them. and I said, tell me about your practice. And then I would follow up with emails and follow up with text messages and so forth. But that was my due diligence, right? And what I arrived at with every single one of them is that this culture is unlike any they have ever worked for in their careers before.
Mm,
And the confidence of knowing that a 25-year career as a business owner in St. Louis gives me a depth and breadth of contacts
mhm,
that will absolutely help make me successful in this endeavor.
mhm.
And really, I have the ego of an entrepreneur, and that's really what I needed to hear. Plus, they gave me an incredible amount of content that I don't have to recreate. It's proven. We have well over 5,000 companies across the world that have used this methodology and grown their companies very successfully doing it. And that's really what I needed to make a decision to buy the franchise.
I Keith, thank you. I'm wondering, first of all, forgive me for asking
No,
a
I,
question I should actually know the answer to, but, I know Vern Harnish has Scale Up.
yes.
Is Focal Point and Scale Up connected?
No, not in any sort of defined way.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
But here's what's great with me and my coaching experience, as I shared with you, I'm a Vern disciple since 2003.
for sure.
I can only use that information, right? Because it's my experience when I'm working with one of my clients, I'm going to use it.
Eh,
And I'm going to use Colin's good to great. And I'm going to use your stuff too,
yeah,
by the way.
yeah,
Certainly not without, certainly with all the appropriate legal bases covered and give credit where it's due. But it's our experience,
yeah.
right? It's our experience.
I understand. And I asked the question because you were focused on, doubling the business in a certain amount, freeing the time, and a lot of the same, a lot of similarities as a lot of growth programs. My question is, um, as we as people become business owners,
Yeah,
okay, through acquisition, and they want to, they know they want to grow the business. Okay, everyone wants to grow their business, right?
yes,
Let's assume that. What are kind of some of the, tips, tricks, structures, thoughts, anything that you can kind of frame for us to sort of get them started on the path of
sure.
how to think about how to do it? And what's can you sprinkle a little bit of your secret sauce onto
Yeah, yeah.
helping them think about how to approach it?
Yeah. So one of the things that I would share immediately is something that was taught to me by a mentor when I went to work for Pepsi right after graduating from college. And I was a 22-year-old who was managing a team of people that had been working for Pepsi longer than I'd been alive,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And they're union guys and they're delivering soda and so forth. And you would think that that's really easy stuff, except they don't want to sell all the Diet Pepsi in the world and so forth, but you got to get them to. So this mentor said to me, the best thing you can do is come into work wearing jeans and a Pepsi t-shirt and ride on the truck with them and
yeah.
listen and do what they do and help them and show them that you are there for their benefit. And I would say that to new business owners. The best thing you can do is to roll up your sleeves, get in the trenches and do what your team is doing and listen and learn and so forth and not start making any kinds of changes until you really understand what you have just bought. And I think that I think that goes a long way to establishing your new culture for this business that you've purchased. And it doesn't have to be radically different from the old one, but along the way, you will gain so much trust and so much respect that your culture will start to become ingrained with with your team. That's number one. Um, Number two is find whether it's a mentor or a coach or a group like EO or Vistage or any other organization where you can connect with someone else who is not the consultant necessarily who's going to tell you what to do, or the banker or the CPA or the attorney. It's somebody who will walk this path with you side by side, because there's going to be days where you are really going to say, why did I do this? What have I gotten myself into? And to know that there are other people who have asked the same question, been down the same path, and so forth is invaluable.
Ain't that the truth?
Yes.
My God.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't want to cut you off. Was there a number
No.
three? Or okay, okay.
Yeah. The number three that I would say for sure is you must create time for yourself. You will naturally want to get 100% immersed in this new organization, which is exactly where I am right now. And I told my wife on day one, you must remind me that I have a family, I have a spouse, I even have a couple of dogs that need to be walked, right? And I got to pull myself away from my desk and do that stuff. And as new business owners, set up a plan to make sure you get your time away.
That's extremely good advice. Um, Keith, how can people get a hold of you?
Very easily, Keith Jacob dot focalpointcoaching.com is my website. My email address is kjacob, there's no S on the end of Jacob, kjacob at focalpointcoaching.com, or text or call me 314-398-3938, and I'm available. And not necessarily to coach. You want to bounce ideas off me about buying and selling, I'm here for that too.
That's fantastic, Keith. Just in closing, and anything else that I didn't ask that I should have? You even said I have a story I got to tell you. Did we get there?
It was the culture story with the
Excellent, excellent.
with my acquisition. Yeah, dude, this has been fantastic time. You are a great host, and I really cannot thank you enough. I love what your organization is doing. I think it is so valuable. I wish I would have known. I wish you were doing this in like 2002, 2003, man. I would have. I have a feeling I don't even want to ask you what you were doing in 2002, 2003. I might have built the biggest staffing empire in the world if that were the case. So you're doing great work, Walker, and thank you very much. Anybody who hears this call is lucky to have you as a mentor and teacher and so forth. So
Oh, Keith, go on. Thanks for being with us today.
you're welcome.